we've been discussing the destruction of nature, and everybody here is familiar with how nature is being exploited, and that if we continue at this pace, there won't be much left. Right? It may take 50 years or 100 years, 200 years. People argue. Some people provide statistics saying in 50 years it'll be pretty badly gone. Other people say the climate will change. Other people say no, it won't change in 50 years. But it's as if they forgot that it will go on for another 50 or another 50. It's certain that it's going to affect everything. It's a matter of whether you decide it's 50, 100, or 200, but that doesn't matter really. The principle of the thing is there, that we are going, at this pace, the way we're going, we are bound to destroy nature as a whole. Right? It's got to happen. Now, not only by change of climate, but by destruction of the soil, by destruction of the forest, by pollution, and by various other ways that we probably don't suspect yet, but as our technology develops in all sorts of ways, it has unsuspected ways of producing harmful results, you see. Now, the question is what is behind that? You see, we say we have an ecological crisis, see, but there's no ecological crisis. The ecology work got along perfectly well all the time until we got in there. The crisis is not in the ecology, it is in us, right? Somehow we're doing something crazy. You see, we are destroying the basis of our life. You see that we use the word environment to describe this whole thing, a very bad word, typical of the problem. It says here we are and we're surrounded by our environment. But this environment is the source of our life, and it's not separate from us, right? See, we could imagine that the brain is looking at the body and saying, that's my environment. And I see 2 kidneys, I only need 1, so I could sell 1, make some money, right? Okay, that's a change in my environment, you see. But I start to change me as I change my environment, right? But you say, okay, most people can see that that's pretty silly, you see, but they say that, but outside the body is my environment. The body is me, but outside is the environment, right? But then it's not true. You see, without the oxygen, where would we be? You see, without the water and the food and all that stuff. You see, so oxygen and food and water come into us, and we constitute us and pass out. And therefore, where does the body end and the environment begin? So you take a molecule of oxygen, it enters, becomes me. You see, where does it become me? It leaves as carbon dioxide. It becomes the environment. So magical transformations take place. You see, but apparently. But this shows something is wrong with the way we're thinking about it, right? You see, this way of thinking about it is producing the problem, right? This separation. Saying the environment is there, it would be quite easy then to say it's there to be exploited, to be used, as you said. Okay, it may be abused, but then still it doesn't affect us, you know. Now, there is something wrong, I say, with this whole way of thinking. This way of thinking doesn't only hold for the ecology, it holds all around, politically, economically, in every way. You see, we have divided the world into nations, and we have said that this is an extremely important difference between nations. So important, see, that the nation can say, we have said that making money and taking care of yourself is the main thing in life, but there's something much more important. If the nation is in danger, that all goes, right? You've got to give up all your money, you've got to send children off to war, you've got to face destruction, you know, you've got to lose everything. They say this is more important than money making, more important than having a comfortable life, and so on. The difference between 2 nations is considered to be so important that we could destroy the world for it, right? Because we have set up nuclear bombs that can do that, right? And the machinery is there ready to go. Gorbachev and Bush are now talking, and that's a good sign. But if that should break down, we would be back where we were before. You see, in other words, we haven't really changed fundamentally the fundamental question, not yet anyway. We hope maybe they will. But In order for that to change, there has to be a change of thought, right? The nation is not that important, you see. I mean, you see, there's the boundary between one country and another. It's an arbitrary line. Right? These countries, the air passes across, the pollution passes across, the radioactivity passes across, the trade passes across, ideas pass across. Everybody depends on everybody else economically, and the thing wouldn't stand up now as a separate nation. Yet people say the nation is sovereign and supreme. Now, I've heard this before. It seems elementary, but it's an elementary point. But this elementary point would be enough to destroy us. For example, we now face an ecological crisis, so we say each nation is sovereign. It can do what it likes. Right? So, see, the Brazilians have said, who are you to tell us what to do with our Amazon jungle? You're making a lot more carbon dioxide than we are anyway with your industries, right? And we say, who are you to tell us what to do with our industries? You're only Brazilians, and you have no right to tell us that, right? So both sides are similar, right? They're both saying the nation is more important than the ecology, right? They're not really serious, right? You see, that is one of the points about our society. There's a way of thinking that is not very serious. This fragmentation is not a very serious way of thinking. This fragmentation establishes false divisions and gives them excessive importance, right? And then it creates a reality which corresponds to with the thought, right? Is that clear? So we say we would like not to have to face this ecological crisis, but we must not disturb national sovereignty. But that it doesn't make sense, you see. It's not a serious way to think. You see, the whole of thought in society, or even of the individual, seems to be pervaded by this lack of seriousness. Right? See, for example, people say we now have a war against drugs. Right? Drugs are a terrible thing, you see. So we fight these drug barons. We'll put them all in jail if possible, and so on. But you see, there are well over $100 billion a year available to be spent on drugs. If you remove a certain number of drug barons, in time that money will attract in some new ones, right? You will not, if that much money is available, you will not stop it. Especially in a society which says money is the highest value anyway. So okay, you would say, how would you stop it? You would have to ask, why do people take drugs? Why do they want them? Maybe they are lonely, maybe they are isolated, maybe they are depressed and bored, and maybe they don't find any meaning in life. There are 1,000 reasons. Maybe they're just copying each other. It's all combined, right? But you see, to try to deal with that would be too disturbing, right? To the self-interest of a very large number of people. Right? The mere thought of it must be very so overwhelming that people could hardly even bear to think of what would have to be done to change that, right? Is that clear what I mean? Try to imagine the kind of change that would be needed to change that. You see, you have all sorts of relationships. Huh? So people say, no, we'll fight the drug barons. You see, so they're not serious. Now, on the other hand, the farmers in South America cannot make a living growing useful food. So since the money is available, they'll grow drugs, right? So you say, couldn't we make it more profitable to grow useful food? No, but that would upset a tremendous amount of self-interest, right? The idea of getting into all that is so disturbing. Nobody would want to think of it, right? So we have to say that that society is not very serious in its war against drugs, right? That is, it's going through the motions of fighting the drug evil, but it is not willing to get to the roots, right? Because it will disturb too much self-interest. Right? Yeah?
The problem of drugs and alcohol is a symptom, but the disease is deep in the individual who needs an escape from reality or whatever problem it is that's making him do that. But what amazes me is why or how there hasn't been one person in this country in 10 years, one politician, who's ever said what you just said, beside myself. No one's ever come out and said that the problem is in the individual. Why does he need to escape from reality? Why is he lonely? Why is he depressed? No one's ever said that. You're the first one I've ever heard say that.
Well, that's
Isn't
surprising.
that amazing?
It's obvious, but you see, it's also the society which has produced those individuals, right? You see, it's both together. And then the individuals maintain that society. Now, so people say, okay, the alcohol industry also, that's legal, the drugs are illegal. It'll make no difference whether you legalize drugs or not, it'll be the same problem, right? Now, you see, the idea would be try to stop the alcohol industry, but too much self-interest is involved in stopping that. Probably much more harm is done by alcohol than by drugs, according to statistics. But the cigarettes have been shown to produce tremendous harm. It's a tremendous struggle to stop that. Now, somehow we must say that the society, including the people, which means the people in it as well, are not serious about all this, right? Since they're not serious, it's not surprising that nothing is ever solved. Yeah.
It may be that they're not clear about it. If, for instance, if health became a priority for the planet in general, but for the individual specifically, so that that became your highest priority, if that were a fact for an individual, then the likelihood of them doing anything detrimental would decrease significantly. So how would you get people to become clear about that?
Yes, but I think they don't want to become clear. They say that it's evident that if people became clear about the alcohol problem, the drug problem, they would have to disturb a tremendous number of things which a lot of people would become very uncomfortable. They would rather not be clear. You see, I think thought has this self-deceptive character, that when the self-interest is threatened, it does not want to be disturbed, right?
I'm confused on what exactly is the drug and alcohol problem.
Well, everybody says there's a problem. Now, let me look at the alcohol problem. You see, a lot of people find that they cannot avoid getting hooked on alcohol, and they keep on drinking, and their health suffers, and they lose money, and families break up, and so on. Now, once they tried prohibition, and there was too much pressure against that, and they had to give it up, you see. The fact is, I read some statistics that a lot of the public health in several ways improved during this period of prohibition. There was much less trouble with the liver and so on. I mean, a lot of people, for example, suffered degeneration of the liver from drinking too much alcohol. And during the period of prohibition, which was very unpopular, nevertheless, and it was not entirely effective, but nevertheless, the number of cases of cirrhosis of the liver dropped dramatically because alcohol was harder to get. Alcohol causes brain to break down, it causes the heart to break down, it causes families to break up. You know, it has caused far more trouble, as far as I can tell, than drugs, you see. Now, drugs are bad enough. They have caused a lot of trouble. People get hooked on them, and they eventually get to the point where they cannot maintain their normal balance except by taking a lot of drugs that cost a lot of money and make them unhealthy, and so on. It isn't really good for people to get stuck on that kind of addiction. With cigarettes, people are addicted. It's plain that it's been proved that cigarettes cause cancer and heart disease and lung disease. And it's been proved cutting down cigarettes cuts that down. Now, all of these things are a kind of addiction, which we could discuss later what it means. It's in the process of thought, basically. Although the addiction is chemical, the process of thought is behind the addiction, that people think they need certain things. You see, for example, there was an experiment done where animals were made addicted to some drug, or was it morphine perhaps, by being injected. So when they withdrew the drug, the animals were uncomfortable for a while, and then it was finished. And then they were not addicted, you see. But when the animals were allowed to inject themselves, and even when they got over the chemical addiction, they were still addicted psychologically, because they could remember that by pressing that button they got a good feeling, right? And they were addicted, right? You see, so that was thought, elementary thought, remembering that that button means a good feeling. Let me press the button, right? Now, so then the lack of that good feeling is a bad feeling, and therefore you feel bad and you want to press it again. You see, so it's the relation of thought and feeling which we'll also have to come to, you see.
What is that good feeling that the animals get chemically? What happens?
Well, we get the same thing, you see. People have studied that scientifically, and they say that there are certain receptors in the nervous system, in the brain, which can be covered up so as to prevent pain, right? In other words, these pain nerves are there normally to warn you that something is wrong. If people lose the ability to feel pain, they can really destroy themselves. Now, there are pain nerves there that warn you when something is wrong, it's unpleasant. Now, there are certain natural substances called endorphins which can coat those nerves and so you don't feel pain, right? Now, morphine is similar in structure, it'll do the same, right? So you coat the nerves that make you uncomfortable and you feel nice. But it works a little while and then it goes away and then you feel bad again, right? So you say, let's try it again. Right? But after a while you get to the point where the body adapts so that even with quite a bit of morphine, it isn't working anymore, you see. You need more. And so on. The morphine is not good for you chemically in other ways. And you see, so the animal and the human being behave similarly, right?
Are you saying that there's pain and there's the good feeling of no pain or pleasure? And what seems to go wrong is that we somehow want to avoid the pain, so we don't see that the problem is not where it seems to be. Like, for example, the problem of drug is not in the drug, it's in the suffering and the injustice.
That's right, yes.
It reminds me of the metaphor of a little child who says, "Daddy, Daddy, the spider bit me." And the father said, "Where?" "There." So he puts the alcohol in the wall. Is that what we're doing?
What?
That seems to be what we're doing all the time?
Yes, well, that's one of the problems, you see, that we don't understand this relation of thought to pleasure and pain, right? You see, we have to discuss that thought is very closely related to pleasure and pain. And but our thought says it's not, right? We therefore don't understand what to do with this pain. And one of the ways of dealing with it is drugs or whatever, alcohol. Other ways are various comforting thoughts, which may be wrong, right? You see, you produce your own endorphins, or you don't need the the drugs.
Like a belief system, religion.
Yeah, belief system will comfort you and produce your endorphins much cheaper. You see.
Socializing.
Yeah.
That's what Jim Baker is doing.
Yeah, I see. But he actually made that a very profitable enterprise too. You see, but nothing compared with the drug industry. But so we don't understand that. I mean, it's not. See, we really have to see what's going on. Now, you see, first of all, to go into all that, people feel, oh, it's too much. You know, I don't want to stir up all that stuff, right? Isn't that right?
What's going on right at that point, though?
What?
You know, when is this once again being so locked into pursuing pleasure or avoiding pain that you can't even face a fact in your life?
Yeah, that's right.
That this is going on.
Yes, yes. You see, the whole system is set up that way now, and so that you anticipate that if you go into that, it's going to be very unpleasant, right? Now, to anticipate pain is to produce something like pain already. So you already have something like pain, and therefore you avoid it by thinking another thought's not worth. Let's not go into that. It's very irrational, yes. But I'm trying to say thought turns out to be very irrational much of the time, right? Or suggest incoherent.
But if a person has never had the experience of going into that, then what are they basing their feelings or thoughts that, oh, I can't go into that because it might cause me pain?
Because just anticipation, just saying, that's a very, may have had some bad experience before, you know, trying to stir that up. It's like, let's not stir up that can of worms, you see, not open it, right? You see, saying this is, people say this is very unpleasant, there are all sorts of unpleasant things going on in there, I suspect, so let's not bother with it.
Well, fear.
It's a kind of fear, yes.
It sounds like maybe enough energy is being used to maintain the lid on the can of worms. That if you divert the attention from keeping the lid on the worms, then that's where that maybe is coming from.
Well, people are, by imagining the can of worms, you feel already the pain that the worms might produce, right? And therefore, you're convinced that it will be much worse when you really open it. It may not be that way at all, but merely to believe it is enough.
Talk about what, in overcoming or dealing with addictions or whatever, it's an internal kind of a duality. It's the good and the bad. It's the bad addiction, and then the thought that wants to get away from that or avoid that. So it's a struggle. And what happens in the process where you're just there with the one thing, which is just the feeling of wanting to have whatever it is that you want to have, whatever you're addicted to, and no thought meets that, so there's no resistance whatsoever to that, and then what happens?
Well, you see, but that's hypothetical. You see, the trouble is what actually happens is that the thought process works automatically. You see, people, you don't have control over it. There's one of the assumptions is that we control thought, but I'm suggesting it works automatically like a program, and it controls us. And therefore you can't get into that state. You will find your thought will not allow you to. It's already, for most people, it is already conditioned, and it's like a program, you see, to keep acting in the usual way. And we want to come into that. What is the nature of thought? Why it does all this? That the thought does not allow you to enter these areas because it is automatically programmed to